kind of the rough number of users and the type of applications that you have. What I do is for every customer, I kind of put together a list of the resources that they have. In this case, this is a 5-user environment, same thing, QB desktop, Office 365. The iPool is a web connector, so it's something similar what you mentioned, and then just to have a PDF. This customer, same thing. This one runs QB Enterprise. It's about 8 users, and they have Office 365. So this is the Florida Solar account is actually, it's an interesting comparison because they are through my old partner through CloudJumper that we used to use, and CloudJumper did used to create the AADD as the domain services. So that's going to be a great comparison. The one on the right side, this one is a Nerdio customer, 8 users, and that one has the little BD domain controller that Andrew mentioned. That's the DCO one right here. You can see just a 2-core 4-gig machine, and then standard environment. Now, neither one of these are actually WVD environments, and it's something that I guess Andrew can also probably comment on that. You know, in that 5, 6 to 10 user environment, I personally would actually recommend just going with the standard RDS type of a setup, because and I personally, we have also other clients that are in that FS Logic based WVD, but we found that it's not only the FS Logic containers that are causing the problems. There are also additional problems that still haven't been resolved with the way that the WVD pane that Microsoft designed, that they control, that routes the connections between multiple different session hosts. And they identified fix. We had like for almost 30 days a critical ticket open with them, and we basically end up scaling that environment back to one server. But not to take you away from this. This is just for the pricing comparison. So we have 2 different environments here. You know, the one with the Azure AD domain services and the one with the small domain controller. They're roughly about the same amount of storage, and you can see that the session host, the terminal server, is actually about the same. This is a 2-core 16 gig. This one is a 4-core 16 gig. So this one is a little more powerful because there's more users. Now scrolling down here, this is roughly the pricing, the billing that I'm kind of tracking as we go, because it can really easily happen one month that, you know, there is some sort of a runaway train with like Andrew mentioned, there's, you know, somebody, you know, adds VPN or starts pushing a lot of data through FTP up to the server through the VPN or something like that, and then all of a sudden you see it double the amount of bill. So we kind of just put it here, put it in basically 3 or 4 categories. You know, what he mentioned earlier, and you can kind of clearly see it over here, the bandwidth and all the other services are not as costly as the cost of the compute or the VMs. You can see that, you know, this is $150, everything else is pretty much small. But here you can actually clearly see that he was spot on with the Azure AD domain services. This is the CloudJumper account, and they basically every month charging you $100, you know, and this is, again, this is just a 5-user environment. So there's really, this is an overkill for them to have the Azure AD domain services right here. Now, the cost of the Nerdio setup is already built within the VM, because that's basically a domain controller. So it's, I don't have it listed here separately, but it comes up, like you said, about, you know, about, I think it's actually a little less than 20. It's probably more like $18 or whatnot. And then the total usage for both environments, you can see this is actually a server with twice as much memory and 8 users. So this is $237. That's the total out the door before the Microsoft licensing, the Office 365. So that's what it roughly costs for you to have a users running QuickBooks Enterprise on the server and connected to that. Now, you mentioned, so was there any question that you would have roughly about the billing? And you can see that the billing is about the same kind of across, you know, 6 months or so time. They're all about $300 for that.
No, I mean, it looks pretty consistent. I mean, less, you know, like a 5% fluctuation maybe.
Yep.
Are you leveraging reservations?
So now it's interesting you mentioned that. We had started kind of dive into it with our larger customer that we have that has about 30 users, because that's where the compute is really expensive and you can see a big difference there. But we ran into a snafu where we clearly told Crayon, hey, we would like to buy a monthly, again quote, monthly build RI, because I didn't want to pay $20,000 for the 4 servers that we have for them, for this particular customer, because it's 30 users, and that's a WVD. And guess what? 2 weeks later, I get a bill for $20,000 from Crayon.
So they haven't figured out the monthly build RI yet, is what you're saying?
Well, they did. I told them, listen, guys, I clearly said it, and what's the girl over there?
Allison.
Allison was like, oh my God, I can't believe my team did this. No, this is gonna get all refunded. This was, guys, November 11th. They have regressed the invoice and pulled it back, but they still haven't been able to process the refund for that. It's just so bad with Crayon and the billing over there. The Crayon billing, luckily the portal does have some more details, but I can tell you, I can go to a lot of the bills. Everything that you see over here is through Tech Data. There's just so much more detailed information with Tech Data that's up there. So for the I send the kind of link to this particular spreadsheet on that. This is what we did for the 30 user customer. And I'm just kind of learning about it myself as well. What we do is we kind of put the session hosts and the different types of session hosts that we host. Like in this case, we had to scale it up to like a E16 v3 because we had to get away from the multiple session hosts due to that problem with the session broker. And before that, we had 2 E8 servers, but you can see clearly from the pricing that whether you have 1 server or multiple servers, it's pretty much the same. The problem that you run into really is if you have more than 30 users on one host, then it's going to be an issue, because I don't think that even WVD is going to handle it well. We are lucky because I only have 30 users there, so that's not a problem.
Yeah.
And Andrew, I was going to ask you, and we can talk this off the subject. The one thing that I'm running into is, and I mentioned that hybrid usage and whatnot, is when you get the pricing from the Azure calculator, I'm coming up with like a huge difference there between when you buy the RI and then you kind of toggle on that switch there, which shows you how much of that would be the license for that. I'm coming up with something like, for that E16, it was like $500 a month that I'm paying for the server license for that. So if I was to, let's say, provide a server 16 license for that, that I had on premise, and I would just transfer it over, it tells me that I would save $500, which it seems to me like that's a lot of money for a server license.
It is, yeah. So I put that on my notes. Let's table that and come back to it, because it's it is. We absolutely need to talk about that.
Yeah, but this is a good example of those small environments that they have. You can see this is the screenshot of the resources. This one is actually for the CloudJumper environment that they design, and this one right here is what Nerdio creates. So they do create, the domain controller. You can see it at the top over here on the right side. Then you have the NICs, the file server, and all of that. Versus the CloudJumper one, has the object for the Active Directory domain services.
Yep. Yeah, so this is really useful, because I think all of us that, when you price these deals out, you're eventually going to need to put together a spreadsheet. I had put together my own spreadsheet for pricing stuff out, because from my perspective is like, okay, Nerdio tells me how much Nerdio is going to cost and how much Azure is going to cost in their estimation. But what they don't tell me is like, okay, I got to add my 20 agents, I got to add antivirus, all that stuff that we add on. I want to know what's the whole environment going to cost. So I ended up making a thing that, adds it all together and then divides it by the user. So I know, like, okay, it's going to cost us, so much per user, right? To run the environment, so we can price it appropriately.
Yeah, and that would be another question too. I guess this would just be an overall standardization of how we're all going to price it. But having 5 users, and according to the Nerdio account, it's substantially more money than having 10 users. So
Yes.
Are the thoughts that we lock the users in on a price rate that they initially like? So, for example, if someone starts off with 5 users and they say they want 5 more, what's a good business way to do we pass the savings on to them, or we just say, hey, here's what it is per user, even though our cost significantly goes down, we still charge them the same per user price?
I think that's going to be for every business to decide, like, do you want to have tiers? And I know some others that I've talked to that have been doing the cloud stuff a lot longer usually have tiers. So they say, hey, if you're under 10 users, we got to charge you this much per user because there's just no economies of scale. But once you're over 10 users, we'll charge you this much per user. Or, maybe even another break at 25 or 50. Yeah, because you're going to find, I think what'll happen is like 5 users or less, you probably can't make it work with WVD. You may be able to make it work with RDS in Azure, but it gets tough.
It's very close. Very close.
Yeah,
you're right.
Yeah. So it's, scale. I think like you start thinking WVD at like, well, I'm probably thinking higher numbers of users, right? Like I was thinking like 10 or more for WVD, but I think lately I'm thinking like you probably don't reap the benefits of WVD until you're 20 or more users. Maybe even more than that. And I've gone through, the other thing that I put in the notes is to talk about the session broker thing, because we had the same issue. We took a client that was multiple hosts and we moved them to one single host because of the load balancing issues.
You must have been spending a lot of time with Vadim, just like I did.
Yes. So, yeah, let me switch back to my screen and let's continue talking about the AD stuff, and then we'll talk about virtual machines and how you make it work from a cost perspective. Let's see.
I stopped sharing right now. There you go.
Okay. So let's finish. Let me see if this worked. Did it go? I want screen 2. There we go. Okay, so hybrid AD. Hybrid AD is some stuff that Nerdio talks about. So basically, here's what they build, Tyler. When they build an environment, they're gonna deploy. You're gonna set up the client, and you click go, and then you come back like 8 hours later, and it's deployed everything. They're gonna build a domain controller, and they're gonna set up Azure AD Connect to connect that domain to the customer's Office 365 or their Azure AD. So that's how they get like single sign-on and passwords and everything. So when users authenticate to the WVD environment, they're authenticating to the local AD, but it's synchronized with the Azure AD. And because they do it that way, there's some limitations on what they can do if you have an existing domain. So what Nerdio does not support is they don't support you connecting an existing client with an existing AD and then building a domain controller inside of Azure and then running Nerdio off of that. They don't support it. And it's easy to see why, because they automate everything. So if you build some custom domain controller from an existing domain, they have no way for their automation to like put users in the right containers and all the stuff that they control that lets you automate everything. So what they do support for hybrid AD, because there are organizations that, say they have on-premise servers and you want to move those on-premise servers into the environment, you're gonna install a second domain controller for that company that is their existing AD, and then you're going to create a trust between that AD and the Nerdio, the AD that Nerdio builds. Does that make sense so far?
Yes. So basically, they won't integrate into the current domain. They're going to make you create a trust between 2 different domains.
Yep. That's correct. Yep.
Okay.
And that's the only way they can support, that's the only way that they can have this thing that's automated and manages everything. At the same time, obviously, they want to be able to support bringing existing infrastructure in. So they're going to do that via domain trust. And that's why it'll cost more, because you're building another domain controller inside Azure. And obviously all the servers that go along with that, there's an application that you're moving in.
So can you do Azure AD Connect without an additional fee, or is Nerdio charging an additional fee for Azure AD Connect?
No, they're just configuring it for you. So when you build a Nerdio environment, it's automatically configuring Azure AD Connect, which is free basically. They're just configuring it for you as part of buying Nerdio service.
Got it. So the hybrid AD is more of the domain trust.
Yeah, the hybrid AD is where the client has an existing AD you want to bring into the cloud. You're gonna leverage that trust relationship.
Got it. Okay. And there's nothing that would prevent, if I had a VPN on-prem, there's nothing that would prevent a local PC from joining their provided domain controller?
No, there's not anything that would prevent you from doing that. You could do that.
Andrew, let me ask you a kind of hypothetical question. So if you do, I understand if you want to, let's say, keep the on-prem environment, but if you always, because you have the licensing through 365, and in some cases you probably have an E3 license and whatnot, or you can add the $2 add-on to it, and you can join the PCs to the customer's Office 365 domain that way, right? And that way you can just completely get away with the on-prem server, just use whatever Nerdio creates, in the RDS even environment, and still be able to have some sort of a management console for the local devices.
Yeah. And that would be my preference. So that's kind of like the same thing that we do for organizations that don't have a server at all, which is make sure they're all Windows 10, which they should be, right? Join it to Azure AD, manage them with Intune, get the customer to go to M365 Business. So yeah, that would be my preference, which would be everybody who's on site is just joined directly to Azure AD. They're using Windows 10. Bingo. And I think you would only need to join on-prem machines to the AD that's in Azure if you have like legacy application requirements that pass-through authentication. It's got to be in the same domain as the server, something complicated like that.
Okay, and so, but when they log on to the actual WVD environment itself, they're not going to be using it as Azure AD joined. It's just going to be the domain credentials.
Yeah, to them, it'll look like the same account, but what actually is happening, so if you haven't seen, so there's a new remote desktop client that gets, that you install on the machine. So I'll bring it over here, right? So this is our client here, right? I have a testing account in their environment. So you install remote desktop and then you subscribe. So I can unsubscribe to this, but you basically subscribe to an organization. This piece here uses the Azure AD identity to find the WVD tenant and connect you to the pool. And then once I log in here, I'm making a local AD login. Now, as far as the users are concerned, because we're using AD Connect, it's the same account, same username, same password. They wouldn't know any different. But what's actually happening is my Azure AD ID is the one that connects me to the tenant. And then to log into the actual WVD machine, I'm using a local AD. And it's on both monitors here, so it'll look a little funny, but basically, that's Windows 10. It's two monitors here, so it's not much to say, but yep. So this is the client. This is what the remote desktop looks like. So it has to be deployed on all the machines. It doesn't use the traditional remote desktop client. This is the part that talks to the Windows service. And so all the things that you used to have in RDS environments, session brokers and remote desktop gateway, like that all goes away and the WVD service handles it. So that's why you only build WVD hosts. You don't have to build any of that infrastructure. So that's what WVD gives you, right? Is they run that.
Andrew, let me ask you a quick question for you. When you, if let's say you didn't have the credentials saved on this one, have you run into the same issues with the pins that if for whatever reason in Intune, you set up the pin for the local machine. That pin doesn't work with the new remote desktop client. At least for us, it didn't work.
Oh, yeah, I
had
got
to-
you. So we have, yeah, we disabled that.
Gotcha.
So I probably didn't come across the issues. So we're using, well, there's one, you know, and I know I don't like the pins, and not because I think they're not secure. My problem with the pin is, like, you tell people, okay, you have one username and password across all your stuff now. Isn't this awesome, right? Because they log in Azure AD. And then you say, but you have these pins that are device specific. And then they go, well, I thought you told me I had one password.
Good point. Yeah.
So we kind of
Makes-
shy away from that. And in this environment here, we're using Duo two-factor authentication. So when they log in, they're getting a Duo two-factor prompt. So we don't really need to have anything beyond, like, you can save your password and they get a push notification every time they sign in.
Gotcha.
So I think we covered all the AD. Oh, the SSO. So the ADFS server that they build is for one reason and one reason only. That's like password resets. You can use it for other stuff. Like, I mean, they're building you an ADFS server. So if you wanted to integrate any third-party applications with your, and I'm using air quotes here, on-prem AD, the AD that's inside Nerdio, you can do that via the ADFS server. But there's really not much benefit. I mean, you might not even need self-service password reset. So we've shut that machine down and blew it away. You don't need to have it. And then I went back and asked them, although I haven't set this up for this client yet, but if you're licensing like M365 Business, or you're licensing anything that gives them an Azure AD, like, any sort of Azure AD premium license, and you use an Azure AD Connect, you can do password write back. So that means somebody can change their password in Office 365, like in webmail or something, and that password would write back to the on-premise password. I asked Nerdio whether that would be fine in their environment, and they came back and said, yeah, you can do that if you want. So if I wanted self-service password reset, and the client's using M365 Business, I would just set up password write back so they can change their password in Office 365, and it will change their local password in AD. I probably wouldn't leverage the ADFS, because then there's a URL the users have to go to a web page to reset their password. There just wasn't a lot of value for it, so we shut it down.
Okay, yeah, that's all good information to know. So when you're setting up Duo, you probably have that set to sync with the Azure AD, and then you also have to configure the basically set up an application for the domain computer login and also for the Office 365 login. So there's two applications there.
Yeah, that's correct. I have two
Okay.
applications set up. So one for Office 365, which is leverage on the conditional access, and then a separate one for computer logins. But that one, and if you know Duo, right? So it only takes effect on computers you install it on anyway. But we have it set to any remote desktop logons to the WVD host, right? I have it installed there. Any remote logons require Duo. So it just and it automatically sends them a push notification. So that lets people save their password, but also the access to it is secure. I mean, like, even with an RD gateway, password only access, just anything you can access from anywhere. It's good to have Duo. So the users have been fine with that. It's worked out well. And Nerdio has a very, very rudimentary two-factor built in if you want to use it, which is basically you populate the mobile phones of the users, and it will read the mobile phone and send them a text message when they sign in, and then they put in a code. So if you have no other option, they do have a two-factor. We just wanted something more flexible. We had sold the client on Duo already, so they like the push notifications, so we use that.
Okay, and printer redirection works well. What about scanner redirection and webcam redirection?
So there's nothing that Nerdio installs or that WVD has built in that's anything more than vanilla RDS. So you may consider, if you're used to doing RDS with like thin print or TS print and TS is it called TS Webcam. If you're using those software, you want to account for that, and you'll want to install that software in WVD environment and leverage it. So, there isn't anything special that's built into, that Nerdio puts in, or that's built into WVD. It's classic RDP printer redirection.
Andrew, this is Robert again. I can comment on that a little because we do work with a lot of clients that have they're kind of heavy printers. We also are a copier dealer, so we have quite a experience with the copiers, so we always try to sell them on as many as we can. And we have found over the years that especially any users that have like a picture heavy printing where the file size is a little larger, the standard thin print or the print through the RD or through the remote desktop app just doesn't seem to work well, or you can go through the redirected printers, through the local printers, and we pretty much as a default few months back we decided for every client to connect them through VPN for the IP printing reason specifically. It's fairly easy. We have found that the tools that Nerdio gives you to set up the VPN are just very straightforward. They pretty much gives you all the settings that you need to populate into the on-prem firewall. It was a matter of probably 30 minutes, even the very first one that we did to set up. They were super helpful because we did have a little bit of a hiccup there, but it was fairly easy to set up. Right now, it probably takes about 5 minutes because all of your firewalls are the same, so you're pretty much just copying that, and it helps tremendously. So you may save yourself a lot of headache and just set up the VPN, and then all of your printers pretty much become local to the Azure environment, and you can just print directly to them, boom, install them on the file server or the domain controller, and they become available to all the users. Ready to, they're easier to manage, and there's only one queue to manage, and all of that, one driver. You don't have to install them locally on every machine. It's just a huge thing.
Yeah, I agree. And that's what we ended up doing is VPN for the printer. So this is one of the benefits of you're building a private cloud environment for the customer, right? It's inside their subscription. It's their servers. It's dedicated to them. It's not a shared AD. And one of the benefits of that is you can easily connect a VPN, install a printer on the, we have it installed on the file server and automatically map it for WVD, and you're good to go. And that's what we did as well. So if people want to scanning, the scanner on site saves to the file server because that's how they were always set up, and that continued to work once they were in this environment. So that's an option for you. So something to consider. It depends on the environment. If you want people to be able to print easily at home and where you don't control the devices and you don't have a VPN, obviously TS Print works as well as it always has in that sense.
Okay. I mean, I think that really, I think you covered all the questions I had. I'm sure there's probably 1,000 more that I'll think of and that other people have.
So I think one more thing to talk about is let's talk about costs. So those were the things that that Robert brought up. Is okay, how do you how do you figure out the pricing? So Nerdio does some of this for you, but there is an Azure pricing calculator, and I can use it to kind of illustrate what he was talking about. But when you go to do the pricing calculator, it's going to ask you, right? It's going to ask you, are you going to take advantage of Azure hybrid usage, and are you going to use reserved instances? So basically, if we just take, if I just go to this calculator here, you can actually build the whole environment in the Azure calculator. And keep in mind, we get discounts off a list price, but for the purposes of, just illustrating some stuff, we can look at the sticker price here and see the differences. So if we looked at, and this is actually not a bad size here, this would be a good size environment, but 16 cores, 64 gigs of RAM, that's a good size host. So let's just assume we're going to do that. We're going to do East US 2 is our standard for where we put stuff. We're going to build a Windows server. If this is a WVD host, you're not going to pay for the operating system. So for the WVD host, you're licensed because the user has M365 Business or higher, right? They have M365 E3, any of the ones that are eligible for Windows Virtual Desktop. But just to illustrate my point here, so if I build the D16SV3, that's a pretty decent sized server. I'm going to say, okay, pay as you go. I don't know what Azure Hybrid costs are.
See, Andrew, this is where I spoke with Vadim about this, and if you toggle that off and on, apparently what it means that you can actually use your current server licenses. Let's say if you have a 16 or 19 license for server, and apply it to that particular reserved instance. So that's what he told me. That's where I can actually see what the cost of the Microsoft license is. So I mean, in your case, the calculator doesn't know that it's a session host, so it wouldn't be really applicable. But if let's say if you pick a file server, and if you toggle that on, then you will see the difference of what the licensing is, and that's where I've been kind of struggling with that, and we kind of still have a kind of ongoing conversation about that with Nerdio, because they've been super helpful giving us some of these tips, because they have so many different environments running to kind of tell us what the pricing is going to be, and when you toggle that, you pretty much, I'm realizing that my 3-year cost for the reserved instance is actually not including the licenses. That's the compute only. Do you think that we write about that? Is that what it is? The reserve instance, it's only the compute, not the license?
Yes, I believe so. So let me explain that. So let's get through the reserved instance first. So see the server here. I made it a little smaller. So let's say you're going to build an 8 CPU, 32 gigs of RAM. Say you're going to build an RDS server. So just for example, you look at this and say, oh my God, right? Well, I got to connect, let's say 128 gig disk is fine. I've got a file server. This is going to assume I'm running it all month. So let's assume we're not turning it off at all. This is going to cost $566 a month. You look at that and say, oh man, that costs a lot. And then you see this down here and like, oh, what's this? So reserved instances is basically, instead of, you can shut this machine off like by the minute. You could shut it off, you could turn it on, you could shut it off, you could turn it on. If you run it less hours, right, it would cost you less. But Microsoft says, hey, listen, we'll make you a deal, right? If you tell me you're going to run this machine for a year, I'll give you a discount. Tell me you're going to run it for 3 years, I'll give you an even bigger discount. And it varies by the machine, so you don't really know what it is. That's why you need the calculator. But you're basically telling Microsoft, I will, at the time that they brought these out, you were saying, I'll pay up front. I will give you a year worth of this virtual machine. And in exchange for that, they're going to take, that knocks about $110 a month off the price. Then I come down to here and it knocks another $75 or so off the price. So this is Microsoft's way of saying, if you let us know that you're going to use the machine for some time, we'll give you a discount. And your ability to do this, like this is one of the things that can save you a bunch of money in Azure. So imagine when you sign a client, like this is how we look at it, is like, okay, if I sign you to a 3-year deal, I can use a 3-year reserve pricing. If I sign you to a 1-year deal, I can use 1-year reserve pricing. If you want me to price it such that you could tell me 30 days and I'm out of the cloud solution, well, this is probably how I would do it. Now you initially used to have to pay these up front. So if you take 376 times 36 months, that ain't cheap, right? To pay it all up front. But Microsoft has since come out and said, we'll let you pay by the month. So we'll take the entire cost of this reservation, we'll divide it by 36, and we'll let you pay that over 36 months with no interest. So basically, I mean, you'd be a fool not to take it, right? Because the future value of money. So you might as well go the monthly reserved instance option. Now there is a penalty, and this is what Nerdio talks about to get out of this. It's going to be, if I'm correct, and keep me honest, Robert, it's 16% of the entire reservation.
No, it's the remaining value of what you haven't paid yet. So let's say if you pay for 6 months and you'll have it left 2.5 years, you only pay the 16% on the remainder.
Okay, I got you.
Yeah, yeah.
My understanding was the whole thing, but yeah, you may be right. So you're going to pay a penalty. However, what Nerdio is telling you is, well, the money that you save is so much more than to pay the penalty if you did have a customer that wants to leave you, that it's totally worth it. So if we take 376 times 36 times 0.16, and we get, I may be wrong about that. It may be 12% or something, but
no, you're right.
so
it was about that. Yeah.
Oh, 16. Okay, so you're going to pay $2,000 if you tell Microsoft, oh, the customer's leaving me and I don't want this anymore. What Nerdio's saying though is like, I don't know, it comes out to about almost $300 a month that you're saving. It wouldn't take you long, right? Over those 36 months, you're going to save $9,900. So you're going to pass a point about, in this case, about 9 months in, that even if the customer leaves you and you paid the penalty, then you would have been ahead anyway. So what they're saying is you should almost always use reserved instances. And the way we look at it is, well, we'll just write that into our contract, right? Like if you leave 30 days, you gotta, you have to pay for, a month ahead before you leave, or something that sort of, there's ways for you to structure your contract that you would recover that cost anyway. So you really ought to look at using reserved instances. This only pays for the compute portion. It doesn't pay for the networking and the VPN and all that. It's just the compute portion of this server, but it's totally worth it. So when you look at pricing out environments, you should be using reserved instances.
So I have a question on that.
Yeah.
The penalty is based on the remaining, right? Not the whole contract. And then what happens if you want to adjust the resources? So you're not particularly locked into that particular instance. You're just locked into any form of subscription with them. So for example, 12 months into the contract, if I wanted to go to 2 cores and 16 gig of RAM, what's that do?
I can comment on that if you want.
Yeah, go ahead, Robert.
We have so there's 2 different ways to look at it. You have a company that's kind of growing in their normal pace, but it's still going to be a small company. So let's say if it's somebody who has 6 users, they may add 7 and 8. So what we generally do in our environments is we kind of track the usage, kind of look at the performance of the compute, what's the memory looking like, what's the CPU, and we kind of build a little bit of a buffer zone for the small environments when we do commit to the reserved instance. So we would accommodate any potential growth in the future of them, and we certainly check with the customer and say, what your plans are, how the company's growing. So that's kind of for the small environment. For the larger environment, this is where kind of WVD really shines, because what you want to do is you want to assign, because you can have the point of the WVD is you can have a multiple session host. So those are almost like a groups of users, and they can be smaller groups. You can have a small, I think Nerdio was recommending between about 6 to 8 users per session host, and you can size the session host just right based on that environment, and that gives you sort of a smaller unit to grow that environment by, because you don't have to add, gonna delete a whole 16 core host. What you can do is you can have a multiple, let's say 4 core hosts with 16 gigs of RAMs and have 5-6 people on it, is what we decided to do. And then when they grow past that particular core, then what you can do is you can add a whole another session host, and then you would purchase the 1 or 3 year reserved instance just for that session host. And then you wait a little bit as they kind of fill up the resources on, let's say, all 2 or 3 hosts, and then you add another session host. So that's a way we cannot resolve that problem. But you're right, you definitely have to look at, what the plans are and how how the resource is performing, before you commit to reserve it for another year or 3 years.
To answer the question directly, though, you can trade in a reservation with no penalty. So like say this D8S V3 and now the client is doubled in size and I want to go up to D16S V3, you can trade a reservation in. You do have to re-up though, so my understanding is if you trade in 1 year in, you're still trading for a brand new term on a 3-year reservation. So you'd be out 3 years, but you can trade it in with no penalty. So you could contact Crayon and say, hey, I got this reservation. I want to trade it for a D16S V3 because we need more resources, and they'll do that for you. And then you'll be re-upping for 3 years, but it won't cost you anything to change that reservation. There's a fine
writing on that. If Crayon gets it right.
Yeah, assuming that's all good.
Yeah.
You should be able to trade in. So everybody has their own things. Like Amazon doesn't allow you to trade in, so there's like a secondary market where you can auction off reservations. But with Microsoft, they've said, yeah, the way it's supposed to work is you can trade in. So only if you cancel the reservation do you pay a penalty. So you say the customer's leaving, I don't want this reservation anymore, then you'll pay.
Okay, and you can trade up or down. So say, for example, I just happen to oversubscribe resources to a particular client. I could actually, kind of downgrade the server to better meet their current performance needs.
I believe so, unless you know different, Rob.
No, I think absolutely. I'm agreeing with you. That's the benefit of that entire environment. You imagine that. How easy this is to sell to a customer that is looking at a buying on-prem server, that once you have it, you're kind of stuck with it. It's, you can add a couple more sticks of RAM into it, but basically that's it. It's not like you can trade in an on-prem server, send it back to Dell. The nice thing about this environment, that's why I'll be honest with you, I'm even trying to really make this happen with some of the smaller customer, because we just think that there's just, especially with the MID model, there's just less hassle to manage anything that's on site. It's much easier. Everything is in Azure. It's organized. The pricing is clear. And you may not make as much money on some of the smaller accounts, but it's still a lot less headache, than anything on premises. It may just be my opinion on it, but that's what we've been doing, converting everybody into Azure.
So before we lose people, let's talk about hybrid rights, because this is something that Microsoft. Go ahead, Kevin.
Can I break in with a question or a thought?
Maybe.
So I thought I heard. So the reason breaking in is it relates to what we were just talking about. So with the doing the 1 or 3 year reserved. If, let's just say, you lose this client and you have the 3 year reserved, can't you trade that as long as it's within the RxIT or whomever, it's within you can move that to other instances. It doesn't have to stay at that client to still keep that 3 year reserved. Am I correct in that, or did I hear that wrong?
I do not believe so.
Okay, we might want to check, because I thought that's what I heard. I believe from Nerdio, not from Crayon.
Okay. Yep. My understanding is if you have multiple subscriptions inside of your own Azure tenant, you can move reservations between them. But from tenant to tenant, even if you're the CSP partner, you cannot move reserved instances. That's my understanding.
I'll try to remember. Okay. I wonder who would know the answer for that.
Tony at Nerdio will know.
I've got a call. Is it with him on Thursday? I've got a call with someone at Nerdio on Thursday. Now I got it with Will. But I'll put a note to ask Will that.
Yeah, they should be able to find it out. I'm pretty sure. And it's funny because, these are things a lot of people don't know about.
You absolutely cannot move the instance or the subscription to a different location. That is for sure, because that's the whole point of the reserved instance. Is they want to. Microsoft just wants to make sure that they have enough resources in their data centers. That's why they're doing all of this for enough hardware resources, so that they wouldn't be doing it if they let you move it from US 1 to US 2 or something like that.
Oh, Definitely with that,
Yeah.
yes. So yeah, as long as you're within the same physical data center, you're right. But I thought, and I'll let you know what I hear on Thursday. I'm jotting a note
Yes,
right
please
now
do.
to ask Will that.
Cool.
Again, I don't know if it'll be definitive, but at least his thoughts.
Yep. So yeah, so let's talk about Windows Server licensing. Yeah, because this is huge. So Microsoft did CSPs a huge solid. So here's the thing: hybrid use existed for a long time, but it only applied to enterprises. So the only way you could use this little thing called hybrid use, which means I've bought Windows licenses and I already own them, but I'd like to transfer those to Azure. In Microsoft, previously, the only people that could do that were enterprises that are on an EA agreement, enterprise agreement. They were allowed to take Windows licenses and just throw them into Azure. And then what Microsoft said is, if you do that, you don't have to buy the Windows license. So what you may not realize is, not only are you buying compute with this server, you're also buying the license for the Windows operating system. So like if you do pay as you go, right? You buy this server, you don't have to buy a Windows license for you. It's included in the price. And then Microsoft said, hey, look, if you got the licenses, you're on an enterprise agreement, we'll let you transfer them and you don't have to pay for the Windows licensing portion. So they let you do this. Now, look at the difference in price, even on a 3-year reserve, right? Like that just went down $260 a month when I slid that. $260 a month is what Microsoft is saying is the Windows portion of that. They're saying the compute portion is a mere $107, but the Windows license is $260. So if you look at that, right? 260 bucks
Times 3 years.
36. Yeah. $9,360 for the Windows Server license for that server. Now, previously, there was nothing we could do about that. Great for people who are on EA, I guess, but not for us. But Microsoft made a change recently. So I don't know if you guys are aware, but you can sell Windows Server licenses through CSP. Does everybody know that? So you sell them on a 1-year or a 3-year term.
Really?
And they're by cores. So Microsoft brought out Windows Server licensing through CSP. And if you go into Crayon, I'll log into our Cloud IQ over here. You can actually buy those licenses, and you can sell them to people. And they're oh yeah, that's stupid.
Sure. Are they 1 year or are they monthly?
You sell them on 1-year and 3-year terms. That's all they offer.
Oh, gotcha.
I just need to get around a password boss issue where when I'm sharing my screen, I can't fill a password. Don't even get me started. Don't even get me started on password boss.
Yeah.
I just got to find the password. There we go.
Don't get everybody started on password boss.
Yeah. Let's keep it civil, folks. All right, so if I log in here and I go to sell CSP, so here's what Microsoft did. Not only did they allow us to sell Windows Server licenses through CSP, they also said CSP Windows Server licenses are going to be eligible for software assurance, and they are going to be transferable into Azure. And that opened up this for us. That means you can sell a client that you are the CSP provider for a Windows software license, and you can cover the Windows Server in Azure with that. Now the client has.
Do you need SA or no?
No, it's all included with
Cool.
with the server license.
So Andrew, would you show me, because we have just a customer that's trying to get a server Windows Server license, and I could not find it anywhere in Cloud IQ.
Yeah. So let's.
And I called them, and they say you have to go to the volume subscription agreement, and then we'll add it to your SPLA report. And
they're not that clear, huh? It's not SPLA, because SPLA licenses don't apply to Azure. So they really have done the CSPs a solid, because there's no other way to buy that license than to be on an EA agreement, or to buy it from a CSP. I need to do, I think I have to go into a client here, right?
So something
Yeah.
I noticed with Nerdio pricing, so I've got just a very simple WVD with 7 users. So it's, very small. But if I take advantage of Azure hybrid usage and I select it as software assurance, I save $7 a month.
Yeah, they're not all the same. There are some exceptions. It depends, it depends what they have. But anyway, so here's the place here. When you go to software subscriptions under, and then you click add, this is where you see you can buy the, we've all seen the extended security updates. So right here are the Windows licenses. So these are the CALs here. So you can buy a user CAL that's good for a year for $876. The retail's $10. And then the Windows Server, you can buy remote desktop CALs on the CSP as well, which is pretty cool. So if you do RDS, you can incorporate the licensing in there. And here's the second page here has the server licensing.
Sweet.
So this is the part that kills me. So 8-core license, right? That covers our 8 cores. So for some reason, Microsoft is saying for $510, 582 list, you can buy a license and use it in Azure what we otherwise would have charged you $10,000 over 3 years for. As far as I'm concerned, it's sign me up. And even before they offered this, I realized, like, I was on a customer service, $600 a month. I click this and it's $300 a month. And I was like, well, how do I get that? Because it's $300 a month in Windows Server licensing. So I really have no idea why this situation is the way it is, but hybrid licensing saves you a bundle. So we turned something that everybody says Azure is expensive, right? Pay as you go. With no hybrid, anybody off the street pay $550 a month for that. Use reserved instances and you buy the license separately. Now, whatever 582 over 36 works out to, there's still a cost, but this is now like, with a drive, $125 a month server. So it starts to tilt the economics of putting people into Azure into your favor.
My goodness, beautiful.
Yeah,
So Andrew, and you were able to already buy that license through Cloud IQ, and where do you put that license number in?
You don't. So it's basically like it's the honor system. So you basically buy the license and then you go into Azure and you click the button on you click the slider on the virtual machine that you're using Azure hybrid rights on that machine, and then you stop getting charged for the operating system for it. And then I guess someday if Microsoft audits the customer or you better have the licenses.
Gotcha. Makes sense.
But because of the way Azure works, which is every server in Azure is basically licensed, I don't think there's a way for them to sort of track that anyway. So.
And is it right on the, let's say, the resource? If you go to the DC01, is it?
Yeah, it's on the properties page somewhere, but there's a slider that says, used as Azure hybrid rights. You just change that, click save, and then you'll stop getting charged for the operating system.
Oh my goodness. This was worth hundreds of dollars just to
it's crazy
here on this call. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, in many cases, as you've seen here, it saves more than the reserved instance does. So it's a great thing. So yeah.
And that would cover, if I had 2 servers with 4 cores each, that one license would cover both servers if I have 2 different OSs running on.
I have an argument with the Nerdio guys. They say no, I say yes. As far as I've read in the way their licensing works is you can license 8 cores and that can be split across 2 machines. They say no, we don't interpret it that way, that you have to license a minimum of 8 cores per machine. Therefore, you can only you'd have to buy 2 8 cores for 2 4 cores. So there's a little bit of, I think it's not fleshed out, or at least the way I've read it is that you can do that. So maybe we'll get an effective consensus on that soon.
So based on that, you could technically buy an 8-core license and run 8 servers with 1 core each.
Yes, I believe so. But yeah, we may have more. Maybe we need to find somebody in Microsoft who can give us a definitive answer on that.
So Andrew, you already mentioned the ADFS proxy that you had in it. Are you keeping those in most of your environments or not? Because that's like an A1 V2 machine that probably costs about 40, 50 bucks a month, right?
Yeah, it might be less than that, but no, we aren't keeping them. I don't see any value in it unless I needed to do SSO with the directory, but I don't really see the need for it.
Gotcha. So you just go with using the Nerdio for the customer, which probably equals to about the same price cost scenario.
Yeah, I mean, if they need
many
a
more
password
benefits.
reset, they call the help desk. If I need to do something more than that, then I'll leverage password write back.
Gotcha.
Last thing to talk about, because this is we're talking about the B series. So Nerdio uses a lot of these, and you look at this and you say 16 gigs of RAM, 32 gig, 4 cores. Oh my God, it's so cheap. The B series is a special type of virtual machine. You'll also see that hybrid writes don't save much, just like you were talking about, Tyler. Looks like it saves about, I don't know, what does that come out to? 12 bucks a month. The B series is a burstable machine, and they were following Amazon's lead on this. The burstable machine has very special sort of setup. So the burstable machine, you can't use all 4 cores 100% all the time. It actually is this thing where you build up credits as the machine sits idle, and then you can use those credits up with bursts of activity over 20% CPU. So you do have to be careful with these. So Nerdio uses them in a lot of places because what they say is like, okay, a remote desktop host, that's a bursty workload, meaning people aren't really doing much. You know, they're gone at night, right? So if you run it all night, you're building up credits, and then they come in the day and they're working, and every once in a while they use some processing power to do some stuff. So the B series machines are awesome for that. But you have to keep in mind that if you run out of credits on this thing, you're limited to 20% of the CPU cores that you have. So what that means is effectively this is going to run like it's like a 1.2 core machine or whatever, because they sum them up however they do it. But basically you're going to be strangled in performance. So I did hit a long time ago. I thought it would be a great solution for a client. I put them on a burstable machine, saved a bunch of money, and then they used up all their credits in the middle of the day, and they called and they're like, this thing is dragging. What the hell is going on? Yeah, and it turns out that the burstable machine did not work out very well for them. So you do have to be careful with the B series machines. You can save a ton of money because the price is very attractive. But you can't use the entire server. You can't use all those cores all the time. You have to build up this credits, and of course it's fiendishly complicated. So all you need to do is be able to keep track of, do you ever run out of credits? Because if you ever run out of credits, then you're limiting the performance of the server. If you never run out of credits, you'll be fine. So it's great for the domain controller. I think their recommendation is a B series for the file server. That I found hasn't worked very well because some of those B series are limited in performance on the hard drives. So we ended up going to a D series on the file server. So you might consider it. We didn't use a B series on the WVD host for our client because it was too unpredictable. So for them, we needed a base level of performance. But the Nerdio guys say basically it doesn't work out. Never use hybrid writes on a B series because the way they charge you for the operating system, it's so little. I think whatever this works out to per month is actually, in most cases, it's less than what you would pay with a license. So when you look at an environment, don't buy server licenses for the B series. Don't use Azure hybrid writes. Use Azure hybrid writes for everything.
Yeah, I concur with everything Andrew just said. We just went through converting all of our file servers to the D series. We kept the B series on some of the DCO ones because they just really don't need any of that. And I just wanted to point out that the nice thing about the Nerdio portal, if you probably have it still in one of the tabs, it does show you the amount of credits right in the portal itself. So you probably you never want to be at 0 credits is what really it boils down to. You want to be still around like that 600 or 700 or 800, and that's a good indicator of how many of the credits have you actually used.
Yep. Yeah, that's correct. So if I come in over here, stupid password boss. Yeah, if I go to custom environment and I go servers, because we're using the B series for the domain controller, so I can click in the domain controller. You can see current bank credits 864, consumed credits past 24 hours.
You know what?
So Nerdio makes it easy for you. Like they grab all this information from Azure and show it to you here.
Are you sure that it's not just a gimmick? Because I'm looking at my domain controller at a different customer that has also 864 credits banked.
Every virtual machine has a max credits. So it could very well be that 864 is the max for a B2MS.
Yeah, that's
because there's a point at which you can't accrue credits anymore. Like they don't let you accrue 3 years worth of credits and then blow them all in a year or something or whatever.
Yeah, imagine how many users environment is this one?
So this environment is 18 users.
Gotcha.
Now you'll see. Now we almost lost this client, so you'll see that I'm running on a ridiculous D32 SV3 because the client was basically like, "This is slow. We hate you." And so my response was, "Go to a single host and just make the host huge, so there's no way they could possibly have performance issues." So we did that, but once that things have settled down, I'm gonna move this down probably to a D16 SV3, and then I'm gonna buy a reservation for it.
I can tell you, Andrew, just from our experience, and maybe we can compare some notes. I have 25 user environment where it goes anywhere between 10 to 25 users kind of throughout the day as the people kind of come and go, but there is at some point 25, and we're running it on E16 SV3, which is a 16 core, 128 gig, and I never saw the CPU usage go over 30%, and RAM probably stays in about that 30-40% as well. And it's a beauty. It runs. We pretty much haven't gotten a phone call since we switched them over, so they've been happy.
And you can see like our previous pool here was basically like their recommendation was 2 of these hosts. So the E is a memory intensive, so it has less cores. So their recommendation was 2 4-core 32 gig hosts, and it just didn't work. So there were a couple of problems, which is probably what you hit. Was the session broker kept like overloading one server and not loading the other one, so we'd end up with like 10 users or 12 users on one server and then 5 people on the other, and so the people on the the one with 10 users are complaining that everything's slow. So that's where I gave up on the load balancing portion and said I'm just going to build one big host because my back was against the wall. I had to come up with a solution that they were not going to call and say it was slow, which we did. It came out fine.
So I still have the critical A ticket open. I had it downgraded with Microsoft to B. We spent several hours on that, even with Microsoft, and I did identify an issue with the routing pane that routes those different session hosts to different pools between different hosts, and they're supposed to be fixing it on the 13th of February is the release date for that. So we are transferring our own environment into Azure as well. So I'll let you know how it goes because I have 2 different session hosts for us there. Although it's only two people in each, but I'll know that way.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, that'll be good to know because that was a problem for us.
The one thing I noticed that the cost, you mentioned the premium SSDs for the FS Logic containers, we did notice that there's a huge difference in price between the premium SSD and the standard quote that you create. So when you go to the Azure calculator, make sure that it is that you account for some of the premium storage because it's almost tenfold the cost of the standard.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and what we ended up doing, so the file share is on the same disk that the profiles are stored on. So when I looked at this, I was like, okay, I could either add a premium SSD and just put the profiles there, or I can just upgrade the whole disk. And what ended up happening was I looked at the cost difference between the two, and for a terabyte or less, you might as well put them all together. But if it was over a terabyte, like I needed, 1.5 terabytes of space, it would be cheaper for me to have a separate disk for the profiles. Yeah, so for in this case, I just converted the existing standard SSD to a premium. I converted the OS at the time again because I was looking, I was doing the shotgun approach so that the user, the users wouldn't kill us. But you probably don't need premium for the OS, and I'll correct that. But yeah, you got to have premium for where the profiles are stored. Otherwise, log on performance is pretty crappy. So those are the two things you need to adjust, Tyler. What I would say is you probably need to use like this, like a D2SV3. Don't use a B series for the file server, or just assume you won't. The Nerdio calculator is going to tell you a B series, but you probably shouldn't. Or just assume you won't. Assume you need a premium SSD for the data disk on the file server. And then take a real hard look at what it recommends for the host size and think about sizing it up a little to make sure you have some breathing room.
Yeah, you said at least 1 core, 1 gig per user, right?
Yeah, somewhere around there. Actually, probably more gigs of RAM. So this environment probably will settle at 16 cores for like 17 or 18 users. So that's pretty close to 1 core. And then it's going to be 64 gigs of RAM. So over 16 users, that's like, that's probably a little bit of overkill but it's hard to say. So yeah, probably something more like a minimum of 2 gigs is a better guideline. I probably misspoke there. What would you say, Robert? Like 2 gigs per user of RAM, or even somewhere between 2 and 4 gigs?
I can tell you that, if I come back to what the example that I was giving you, it's hard to do on the small one, but on the bigger one where we have about 20 users, it's a 16 core, 128 gig. I am guessing that, a core per, or just like 3/4 of a core per user is a good estimate. So somewhere between 3/4 of a core to a core, if that's a number, I'm sorry, you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And on the RAM, I would say, it depends. The RAM in those E series is not very expensive, to go from, let's say, 64 to 128 gigs. So you won't see really that much of a difference. And it'll allow you to accommodate for some of the users that are just crazy for the amount of tabs that they have, and you don't have to be calling them and limiting them. Of course, that all will change some. I don't know if you already noticed, but we got an upgrade of the WVD, the actual desktop, and we already got the new Edge browser that's based on Chromium. And we saw that the memory usage jumped up about 30% in general from the old Edge. So
Chromium is good for that, yeah.
Yeah. Well, no, the memory usage is higher with that. So you have to accommodate for it. So if somebody had, 10 tabs in Edge, they were on average using, X amount of memory, and now they have 10 tabs in the new Edge, which is based on Chromium, and it uses 20% more.
Yeah, I was agreeing with you. Like the Chrome, because most of our, most people are using Chrome and the amount of tabs. I mean, I'm guilty of it myself. I got 32 gigs of RAM in my laptop, so I can have if you saw me before I closed Chrome before we started the meeting, I usually have about 50 tabs going at once. So I'm probably the biggest offender. Yeah, and this is not a bad price machine. So basically all the series have their own thing. E is memory intensive. So you'll notice that you can get a 16 core with 128 gigs, whereas the 16 core in a D series gives you 64 gigs of RAM. And you'll notice the price difference between those. It was on a 3-year reservation with hybrid use. It was only, what did I come out to, about $85 a month? Mm-hmm. So that's not bad. If you want to make sure you have the RAM for users, it's really not that much more. Man, look at the difference in price.
Yep.
$827 to
Andrew,
$290.
you have to send me your address, because for that toggle and what you just told me about the licenses, I'm gonna send you a huge box of, and that's not gonna be a box of chocolate.
I'm glad to help, man. That hybrid usage is like, yeah, it's critical. It's critical. So once you have that figured out, you start to get to the point where you understand like what it really costs. I had posted at one time. I'm not sure if it's accessible to everybody, so I can find it. Let me see if I can find my pricing sheet though. So I put together kind of a pricing sheet on how I would price this to the end customer. And I don't know, like while I'm looking for that, Robert, do you have like a target you're shooting for your cost of delivering the cloud service to the customer, like $60 a user? Is it lower or higher than that?
So that's the upper, and you're absolutely right that it is a moving target, especially with some of the smaller accounts. Now, I do have to share something. I did have a really nice meeting with the guys at Nerdio before I walked into a prospect that we are trying to sell. It's an existing customer of ours. That's where we do managed print and then some kind of project-based type of things. But they do have about 16 terminal servers with close to 750 users on it. So I spoke with Vadim, and he was pretty confident that we can go probably as low as about $20 per the consume per the compute that is going to be your cost. So that's kind of your bottom number. Once you go over probably 200, you'll find out that you probably, the $18, $19, $20 is about right. So all of a sudden you're going to be finding out that you're not trying to sell the customer on the cost of the compute, because it's insignificant compared to their on-prem cost. What the biggest problem is, which that's what I'm trying to focus on right now, is how are you going to sell them on switching their licensing from volume-based licensing that they're doing right now, and they're fudging it, and they're applying one license to 5 different people. Yeah. From that, so you're talking about like $1 or so, that they're paying per user per month per license, and then you have to switch them to the M365, which is 15. Right, so their cost is 15 times as much, and when you take that over 3 or 4 years, it's a huge delta that it's almost impossible to sell them. So that's really what I'm basically saying, that I think that the cost of the actual environment is not as the big issue that you have to be looking at addressing. You have to be really addressing the license. So the best thing that we've been doing is just like, oh, this is what it's going to cost you, plus you're going to have to pay license on your own.
Yeah, and I kind of take the way I look at it is like every client is different. There are some that we're going to quote the price and it includes M365 because it's better to just put all the costs together and they understand. And then there are some where, especially ones that are already buying Office 365 licensing, that we're going to be, this is the licensing you have to buy to take advantage of this solution, right? Because you got to have at least M365 business. And I think it all depends. And the thing is, like, that's one of those sales things. It's how they see the value, not versus whether it's there or not, So this was the sheet that I put together, and this was kind of rudimentary based on basically like, what does it cost to run this? Because I can't price it if I don't know what it costs to run this. Now, I put this together back before they had monthly reservations. But this is an example of a 15 user environment where Nerdio calculator told me that the cost up front was, this much for the reservations. Nerdio licensing is $10 a user, so I'm just taking 15 times 10. That's our deal with Nerdio, is we get the $12 a month enterprise licensing for $10 a month. Now, directly from Tony, and I've told many people, as Tony says, never use anything but the enterprise licensing. So where they recommend the pro licensing and stuff, those environments are more locked down and you can't change sizes of some machines and stuff. You don't want to use that. You always want to use enterprise environment. So we account for enterprise licensing, and then we say, okay, what's the Azure monthly cost? That also figures into, the reservation, and this all works out anyway, even if you pay this on a monthly basis. And then if we're bundling M365 Business into the solution, the price that we're going to give the customer, then we would add that in here. If we're not bundling it into the solution, meaning it's going to be a separate line item on their, on their bill, they're already buying Office 365, then we won't bundle into the cost. And then I do a server count for Ultimate Care. So I've got 3 servers for this environment. I'm going to pay, I'm going to pay for support for those. I'm not including the end user support, but this was before they had user-based pricing. The reason why I'm not doing that is because I assume they're either going to buy support from us or they're not. And that's going to be on it used to be on a computer basis. But if I want to bring a cloud solution to somebody, I'm not going to include on-site support in that pricing. Unless I'm giving them one price for everything, it's going to be $200 a user or whatever. So I just didn't include that in the calculator. And then I have other stuff. So if we're doing Duo MFA, we pay $270 a user for that. And then I take that cost and amortize it over the period, so 3 years. And it's $40 a month a user. So then I just did some calculations here, like if I want a 60% margin, then what do I have to sell that at? Well, I got to sell that at $101 a user. And then if I want to, and then I just did, if I want to make up a price and see what my actual margin is, I can go ahead and do that. And then I had months to break even. This is back when you had to pay upfront for reservations, because I wanted to know like how many months before we've paid for the reservation off of what this user is paying us. And then this is how much it costs. So it's 12%, not 16%. But I have if you cancel the reservation, this is what you're going to pay, $513.
Yeah, we are at about that 135 per user, and as high as about 169 is where we got the WVD user. And yep. I'm thinking that I'm finding out that the 130 smaller environments are probably not making too much money, because again, when you do this calculation with 7-8 users, it's a whole different number. So yeah, I think I agree with you from what you said before, is that if you have less than 10 users, you're gonna have to have a tier for less than 10 users, which is gonna be actually more. Yeah.
And then I've done this if you want to, if I want to compare costs to a client that wants a short, if you want a shorter term, 1 year, you're $115 per user. If you want to have 30-day out, you're $130 per user. I just wanted to kind of compare those so you could see what you're getting. But that's not bad, down around $40 a user, because that traditionally is like, I forget what like Cloud Jumper was back when they were just straight,
45.
Yeah, $45 a user. So you're pretty close. I think what you're selling against, though, right, is you're going to sell against, like, we have a company around here. I don't know. I guess they're nationwide, but they are local, called Right Networks. And Right Networks is like QuickBooks hosting. Come on over, right? And they'll do QuickBooks hosting, and they're starting remote desktop probably down around $55 or $60 a user. Now it quickly adds up, because I think if you want any more applications than just QuickBooks, you want Office, it adds up quick. But you are going to have a lot of users who have or prospects who have like $60 a month per remote desktop stuck in their mind. So you do have to sell the value of a solution like this. It's private cloud. It's your own environment. We can hook it to your printers. You own this environment. We have full control over it. There's a lot of benefits to it, but you're definitely selling a premium cloud solution when you do this.
What surprised me there, Andrew, is that I don't see that you're including the on-prem, the 20 service for supporting the clients. Is it because they just simply haven't decided what they're going to do about it yet, or?
No, the reason why was because I wanted, one, we were dealing with a client that was already buying full support from us. So what they were really asking is, how much does it cost for us to move from these other guys' cloud that we were dealing with today and move to your cloud? So for them, we were just pricing only the cloud portion. And the other part of it is that we, I initially priced this for only clients where we would do full support anyway. So I wanted the cloud to be a different line item. Like sometimes if you come in and say, hey, it's $95 a computer to support you. Oh, you want a cloud solution? Okay, well that's $130 a user. Put that together, it's $225 a user. But we weren't necessarily just coming in and saying, oh, it's $225 a user and we support your entire environment. There might be, there certainly could be prospects we do that with, but the goal of the pricing was just to price out the cloud environment, if that makes sense.
Gotcha. So if I was to ask you, I don't know if you want to share it, because we are pricing between the 140 to about 180 is includes the cloud, the licensing, as well as the full support 24/7. And that could be just the Tampa area is competitive, or maybe I just can't sell it for more.
Well, yeah, I mean, I hear you, because I think it can be tough. It depends on the client. Like for example here, like we were able to sell a real premium solution. So we sold this, although this is a generalized, we also had Adobe licensing. We had a couple of the things we included for the client, the QuickBooks licensing as well. So, you have to include that, but we sold the cloud as $160 a user upsell, and they're already paying us $95 a computer for support. That's nice. Yeah. Now, if you really look at it, it's more like it's $130 because there's another $30 per user is taken up by QuickBooks and Adobe licensing. So you really can't call it that. So you're probably more like it's like a $225 a user or $220 a user solution. And even then, it's sold as a pretty premium solution. I'm not so sure we could just walk in any prospect and sell this at $225 a user, but certainly that would be our dream, our goal. Maybe $200 a user is competitive. But I think below $200 a user, now you get into how do I maintain my margin? What am I gonna do to maintain a 60% margin below $200? And I don't know what the answer to that is. But it's a 15 user environment. As you scale higher, that may change.
Yep.
Have we answered everyone's question, or is everyone gone by now?
I only got one. It's just may not be a related question, but for VPNs, are you doing any Meraki site-to-site VPNs by putting in a VMX?
Well, you bring up a really great point, and I don't know if you've looked at pricing of the VMX, Kevin, but for some reason, aftermarket firewalls in Azure, this is actually a problem because we would put we're a Sonic Wall shop. We put a Sonic Wall on your site, right? You got no matter what, anybody says, it's a fine firewall, whatever. But we will put an advanced firewall on your site. But in the cloud, that is prohibitively expensive. Like everybody that offers a cloud firewall in Azure, it's just obscenely expensive. And correct me if I'm wrong, KP, the VMX from Meraki in Azure is only a VPN point, right? It's not an advanced Meraki firewall, right?
I don't know. We haven't done one. I want to start though. Was my thought, because so I thought I could do both, but I don't know that for sure.
Yeah. And if you look at the pricing, like I'll use Corporate Armor just because they're like easy to find pricing. I think they'll have the VMX pricing. It's so expensive, and then you got to pay for the compute as well. Now you can use a reserved instance, but I mean it's just crazy. It's crazy. I'll see if they have the VMX here. VMX 100. So 1 year license, $1,500 plus compute. So it's not cheap, especially for a small environment. Like
Right.
I'm pretty sure I was buying MX64s with 3 years on advanced for like $1,600, and that's a piece of hardware, and that's 3 years of licensing. So you look at that and you're like, what, what the heck, man? And this, I think, I don't know if the VMX is, because they don't have different sizes. So some of the vendors, this would, like a certain size of firewall will be limited to the size of machine you can use it on, and you want to use it on a bigger machine, you got to pay more money for licensing.
Okay.
So, and there's others, right? Barracuda offers a virtual firewall. That's going to cost you at least a couple $100 a month. They're all just really expensive, and I don't, so I don't know what the solution to that is. For incoming stuff, we have a client that has an Azure environment where they're hosting a web app, and I built an Azure WAF, web application firewall. And that is not bad. Like at the lowest tier, I think it's cost them $100 a month and it's totally worth it. But for the like content management and, and all of the advanced firewall features for the outgoing connections, I haven't found a cost-effective solution yet in Azure. It's just obscenely expensive, but
Right.
I haven't checked all the vendors in a while.
Right, and I just took, while you were chatting, I took a look, and the VMX is just extending auto VPN and SD-WAN. So you're right, it's not a standard next-gen firewall. So it really just gives the ability to create the VPN endpoints, which you can do. Now you can't, it's not as full-featured, but we have a tunnel up to, for one of our clients to Azure.
Yep. And so do you have ICAV 2 now on Meraki? So you can use a dynamic gateway? Yeah, so that's been a problem with Meraki, which is they hadn't supported ICAV 2 on the Merakis, and Microsoft only allows you to use an older type of VPN gateway that only lets you have one site-to-site connection with ICAV 1. Yeah, and so to go to their dynamic gateway, which lets you have multiple, you'd have to use ICAV 2.
Right.
Which, other than that, though, it's pretty easy. Like it's pretty open standards. I've never had trouble establishing an IPsec VPN to Azure with almost any piece of hardware. I did a sonic wall in the case of this customer over here, and it was easy.
Yeah, we are PFSense shop, and it worked like a dream too.
Yep. The issue is a good firewall in Azure. It's tough right now. So we rely on OpenDNS and, endpoint protection, and, it is what it is.
So Andrew, you putting VSA on all of the endpoints, but it's not the ultimate care. It's just what do you call that? The signature care?
This client's ultimate care with VSA on all the endpoints, yeah.
On the endpoints, gotcha. It wasn't shown on the price. That's what I asked. Yeah.
What I'd like to get to now with user pricing, theoretically, you should be able to offer the cloud to a client that you don't support their local machines. You would pay the $22 a user, and they could call in and get help with the Nerdio environment. If it's a problem on their local machine, it's on them. Or what we would like to do is have a thin client solution. I hate thin clients, though, because there are no thin clients that are really made to be managed by MSPs. They're all made to be managed by large enterprises.
Right.
So my dream is to be able to create a locked down nuke, Intel machine that has Windows 10, and you potentially could put an agent on it, but at least all your tools work on it, that you lock down, and it only connects you to Windows, WVD, and it doesn't do anything else. Maybe you allow the web browser. That's my dream. And then we could say, hey, here you go, for this much more a month, or maybe you pay us one time, we'll give you a cloud client. You plug it into your, machine, and you can use the virtual desktop that way. And there's no support cost for the on-site, right? No device cost.
Yeah, it would be interesting. There. I'll be very happy to start working with you if you want, if you have that as a project, because we are constantly trying to do pretty much the exactly same thing. We used to work with the links environment where we loaded the Linux link.
Yep.
That's a LYNX. I don't know if you've heard of them on some of the nukes. That of course stopped working with the WVD because of the remote desktop client, and now we are kind of in the midst of using. We're trying to lock down the windows as much as we can, but you can only do so much with the nice thing is that you don't have to account for the Windows license anymore. So we buy actually refurb Lenovo Tinies, and we apply the license from the M365.
Yeah.
So at least you got the license covered that way, so you don't have to pay for Windows again.
I know, because when we were building cheap, to build a cheap, PC for a thin client, it becomes, $100 or whatever for the OS license becomes a significant portion when you can build the thing for like $250. Then you got to spend another $100 for the Windows license. So that is nice.
Yeah, no, it definitely helped with the WVD, the licensing. We are down to, we actually work them on a lot of the Tinies, or we have been buying the Ace PCs that are $125 brand new, and they work well. And they all, 8 gig, 64. Small SSD drives in them, flash drives.
Yeah, it is amazing. It is amazing what you can buy.
but how to lock it down is the question.
Yeah, so we look at something that comes along like Threat Locker may be a really good way to lock that down, which is you can't install anything on it, So, that's a possibility, or at least, what we'd like is it get it to a point where it's steady state, right? Because we could use Intune for that as well. But where if the machine breaks, though, what do? Well, here's a spare. You pull it out of the closet, you plug it in, you sign in with your Azure AD, and it automatically installs a remote desktop client. You subscribe and connect back to your desktop. That would be the ultimate where you get where nothing other than turning it on and signing in would set it up for you.
Yeah. Cool. I'm just gonna have to run myself.
Yeah, we've probably taken long enough.
Thank you so much for everything.
Awesome. I think I started the recording a little bit late. I must have hit it earlier, and then I noticed it wasn't on. So it started about the time Robert started talking initially. So, but that's probably long enough. 2 hours of this crap is. But all everybody can take. Yeah, but I hope this was useful. And as we get more experience, we can certainly have more. We can certainly have more calls and record these and do it again.
Perfect.
That is all. Well, thanks everybody for joining. Good discussion.
Thanks much, Andrew. Thanks, Robert.
All right, see you guys.
Talk to you later.
Bye.